Day to You is the sequel to the 2017 film Happy Death Day, the surprise hit to many. This one takes place literally minutes after the first film leaves off. Tree thinks that she has finally escaped this loop that she was in, where every time she dies, she wakes up at the brand new start of the day. But in this film, certain things happen to where the loop is back, and certain things about the day are also different, in a different approach that I actually was not expecting with this film. Very similar to how the first film was a horror film, but it was actually more so a comedy. This one's a little bit more sci-fi. I rewatched the first Happy Death Day before seeing this new one, and I actually liked it a little bit more. If you remember in my review, I gave it a C. I think I was being a little bit too harsh then, because I overall still enjoyed myself while watching, and though I don't think it's a perfect film at all, I think I'd bump my grade up to a B-. Like, I honestly do enjoy the first film a little bit. But going into this film, I think everyone can kind of agree that no one was really hyped to see how they continue the franchise, because I think a lot of us just kind of had the same assumption that the first film was just a fine, simple little movie that doesn't really need to go into this big world-building thing or anything like that. Like, they didn't even explain why Tree was in this death loop, and no one really even cared that much, because it was just a fine little horror comedy movie that didn't really require to have these answers specifically. But this sequel is trying to now answer that, as they try to build the world up. And I actually walked out of this film, surprise, surprise, actually enjoying this film slightly more than the first one. And I was not really expecting that. I think I just really love how strange this movie gets as far as digging into the sci-fi genre, because as I said earlier, the horror is kind of toned down by a lot. It's there, and it technically is a horror movie because it has these horror sequences thrown in, but they're very tame, and it's not really going to horrify many. It's not gonna like push the boundaries of horror. It's not like there's like these epic kills like in Halloween that we just saw also by Blumhouse. It's a very tame-ish horror movie. It's a horror movie you could show to like a middle school. But in the first film, I really liked the comedy in that one, and in this one, I really like the comedy element, but also the sci-fi stuff, because when they do answer why there is this loop and what's happening, I was actually kind of into it, and I was like, okay, well, I'm digging it because it fits the tone of these movies, and it also just works with these characters that I'm watching. I'm enjoying watching them, and I'm actually intrigued to see where else this can affect them. So I was actually buying into the premise of this movie, as goofy as it might sound to some. As soon as you hear why certain things are happening, some people might be like, really? That's what's going on? That's not realistic. But I was okay with it. Like, I was able to suspend my disbelief that much just because I was enjoying the characters and what they were setting up so far. Speaking of these characters, Tree. I love Jessica Rothe. I think she's fantastic in the first Happy Death Day, and in here she's doing that once again. She is so good. She carries this movie so well. Even if you don't like this movie, I think everyone can just agree that she is a star in every sense of the word. And I think we'd benefit a lot from seeing her more in other films out there. Like, just besides from the Happy Death Day stuff, if we just see her in more films, because she's such a great talent, she's still able to preserve that frustrated comedian side of her that we see so much in this film, while also having this great range where she's able to go from that comedy element to a more dramatic one. And there's actually some moments where the movie surprisingly tugged at my heartstrings a little bit, and I was honestly really surprised by that, because it was kind of dealing with some stuff they set up with the first film, and this is coming from a guy who just thought the first movie was decent, and I liked it overall, but you know, it was a decent movie. It was still able to tug at my heart a lot, and it was mainly just because of her performance. She's given a lot of tough choices in this movie, and you feel for her character all the way through. I loved her. Seeing her back once again as this character, she did not miss a beat. Even the character Carter, her chemistry with him once again is still very on point. He's just such a very likable guy, and you want to see these two end up together because they just click so well. And also the friend who kept barging into the dorm room in the first movie, Ryan, they gave him a little bit more to do in this film, and I actually like his character much more in this one than in the first one. And I still liked his presence in the first movie. It was just a nice little thing that we got every once in a while, but in this one they actually took his character and kind of built on it, and now I can say that he's actually one of my favorite characters because they actually gave him more character, as well as his other friends that they introduced in this movie. They all had really good chemistry, like the whole group of people that are hanging out trying to figure out what's going on in this world right now. Even Daniela, who is pretty funny in the first movie, but definitely not like a major player in that, they even give her some more to do in this film that actually made me like her character a little bit more. Like, she actually had some pretty big laugh out loud moments for me. So it's safe to say that with how much I was enjoying these characters, that the comedy element is still there. There's tons of funny moments in this one, just just like in the first one, the director Christopher Landon is not missing a beat at all here. You can tell that he really does care about this Happy Death Day franchise that he's making here, like he's really invested in it, and that's great. After seeing what he's done with this film and the film prior, it's kind of hard to imagine that he directed a film as terrible as Paranormal Activity, the marked ones, because he has a really good eye and a lot of creative thinking as far as his direction goes. However, as much as I really did enjoy a lot about this movie, and in some cases enjoyed more than the first film, I still had a few issues with the movie that kind of do hold it back. As I mentioned earlier, Jessica Rothe's performance is able to really tug at your heartstrings, but the family dynamic here is still pretty rushed, kind of similar to how I felt about it in the first one. In the first one, it was just kind of like, it felt like an afterthought that they just kind of put in at the last second, and in this one, it doesn't feel like that, but it definitely feels like there is some stuff missing in the middle to help kind of flesh it out a little bit more, make certain things feel a little bit more impactful. I also thought that once they got to who the killer was in this film, I found it a lot more predictable than the first film, because in the first film, the first person they try to tell you is the killer is just kind of like, really, that's all you got here? But then the second person they tell you, oh no wait, it's this one after all, you were like, oh okay, I actually wasn't expecting that. But in this one, I found it much more predictable, and it just didn't really add a whole lot of tension to the mystery element of who's under the mask, because I kind of guessed it really early on, and it just felt really obvious who it was, and once it was unmasked, it was like, yep, I knew that already, and it's kind of lame that you're doing this, honestly. Speaking of the killer, another issue that I have with this movie that isn't in it as much, but something they do in the first one too, is that certain editing choices they make the guy under the mask almost kind of like a ghost. Like there's a shot where someone's gonna stand like in this corner where the killer had like no way of showing up. They'll cut to a different one, then cut back, and oh, he's standing there suddenly, but how'd he get there unless he can just like apparate places. And it's just certain editing choices like that make this killer in the first movie and also this one feel more like a paranormal presence in a sense, but it's supposed to be a real person. There's also one scene in there involving the editing and the green screen that they have on display, and it is so bad, and they linger on it too. That's the thing, is that it's like a slow-mo, like, funny moment flipping off the camera, but it's like with this green screen, and they also have some more of that fake blood that was in like one short moment in the first Happy Death Day, and I was like, oh my god, the fact that this is also in slow-mo so that the entire audience can just soak in how bad this looks, that is not a good choice. It could have been really funny, but when I was starting to laugh, I was just kind of like, oh, I'm not laughing at the joke of this scene, I'm more so laughing at how bad the green screen looks back there. And finally, a reoccurring issue with many movies, including Escape Room earlier this year, the sequel bait ending they have. And I've heard from some people that Christopher Landon has always planned for this to be a trilogy, so I'm not saying that this is like a studio-made post-credit scene thing like Escape Rooms kind of felt like, because it really doesn't. The thing that they set up in the last 2 minutes of the movie after like the first part of the credits, it does feel like the series is kind of building to that, but I'm really more so just kind of frustrated that they felt the need to put the introduction of the third film at the end of this one. Like, we wrapped up the story and it feels like, oh, that's it, and it feels really abrupt, but then they're like, oh no, what we're actually ending the movie on is just this forced intro to the third movie. And it was like, I feel like you can just make this one as good as you need it to, and then once you get to the third one, you can actually introduce this stuff. You don't need to cram it into the second one to basically spoon feed the audience that, hey, there's gonna be another one. This is what it's about. Come back for it. This way we can save money on not filming like a proper intro to the third one. We can just recap this moment. Like I said, it doesn't feel as bad as the ending of Escape Room or anything, but I just feel like it's pretty lazy for any studio to feel like we have to include something like this at the end of our movie, because how else will people know to come back for another one? It's like, if people really like the movie that you made and you tell them there's another one coming, you don't need a scene that basically is just like, well, you gotta come back either way. You can just have people be excited if you announce that there's gonna be another one. I don't know how many times people need to say that. But overall, I enjoyed this movie a lot. I thought there was a little bit more heart to this film compared to the first one. I laughed at this movie a little bit more than the first one. I enjoyed these characters so much, and some of them even improved since the first one. And even though I have some flaws with this movie, even ones that kind of carry over from the first one, overall, I do really enjoy it. Once again, it's not a perfect film. I don't think any of the Happy Death Day movies are perfect, but I really do appreciate what Christopher Landon is trying to go for here, because it's a very different kind of horror comedy film, one where the comedy is kind of taking over, but I really enjoyed it at the end of the day. I'm gonna give Happy Death Day 2U a B-. I think if you enjoyed the first Happy Death Day, you'll really like this one. I think there's a lot of great things here to enjoy about it when it comes to its comedy, some moments of horror, and a lot of tree moments that are just glorious. Once again, I need to say this again, Jessica Rothe is a superstar, and I want to see more of her. She's fantastic. She absolutely carries both of these films. And if there is going to be a Happy Death Day 3, which I'm kind of hoping for at this point because I enjoyed this one a little bit more, I can't wait to see what they do with Jessica Rothe again. Like, I just can't wait to see her play this character once more, if they do make a third one. But if you've seen Happy Death Day 2U, leave in the comments below what you thought of it, and as always, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe. I'm Jackson Fulcher. See you guys next time.